What's going on, U.S. history people? This is Mr. Norris,
And Mr. Lawrence.
and we are here to talk to you about colonial America from the founding of Jamestown in 1607 up to the end of the French and Indian War in 1763. So let's get started.
So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, we should talk about what the issue of colonization and imperialism is. We've talked about imperialism as when one nation dominates or takes over a,
Weaker nation? Are you looking for weaker, Mr. Lawrence?
that's correct, not necessarily smaller, but weaker.
But weaker.
Alright, so quickly, just as a review, we need to understand some reasons for American colonization. Why were the British, the French, European powers interested in the American continent for colonies?
I'm thinking right away most stuff comes back to money, so I'm going to go with money as an answer.
That's right, it's all about the cash money, but the question is, in the colonial time period we're studying, why and how were European countries able to make money off our colonies?
Right, so there's many different opportunities for Europeans to make money, and we see this in lumber. Lumber was a huge industry, particularly in the north. We also see a giant fur trade developing, especially with Native Americans. And in the south, the mother of all cash crops was
Tobacco.
tobacco, yes. And later on, we will see cotton, sugar, different minerals, and even living space as well. What is happening in England at this time that increases the need for living space in America, Mr. Lawrence?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you remember back to your global studies days, the issue of industrialization and the Industrial Revolution was going rampant in Europe at the time. As a result, you have the growth of cities known as urbanization. So the issue of living space becomes a reason why Europeans will start to leave the continent and start looking elsewhere.
All right, let's talk about the peoples of the colonies. And we see a connection of three major cultures that happens. And the first one is Europe. So this idea of the Europeans coming over here. And when they come to the Americas, who do they meet?
The first interaction they'll have is with native tribes. So we've talked about Europeans moving west, or what we call these westernized nations, and the first group they'll have to interact with are natives. As colonization continues, things like cash crops, agriculture becomes a major industry in the Americas. Europeans are going to also have to interact with Africans because of the European idea of forced labor, ultimately bringing slavery to the Americas as well.
All right, we're going to talk about the French and Indian War. We're going to flash forward to 1754. So who is fighting? Is it as simple as the French and Indians fighting each other, Mr. Lawrence?
You would think so, just by the title of the conflict, or what we refer to it in the Americas as the French and Indian War. Mr. Norris, do you remember what they call it in other parts of the world, maybe Great Britain?
I believe they call it the 7 Years' War, even though it lasted 9 years. But yes, they do call it the 7 Years' War.
But for our sake in American history, we refer to it as the French and Indian War, and you would think that it's a war between the French and Native American tribes, but ultimately the people who fought were the British against the French, and many Native American tribes will ally themselves with the French, some with the British, but mostly with the French.
So whose side did the colonists fight on?
Well, the colonists, from our perspective in American history, are going to ally themselves with the British because our colonists at the time in the Americas, we consider ourselves to be British colonists.
So why are they fighting? What's the deal? I tend to remember that most wars during this time are fought over land. And in this case, it's going to be over the North American colonies, both present-day Canada and America. Who is responsible for starting the French and Indian War?
I think, have you ever heard of a guy by the name of George Washington?
You are absolutely correct. I do remember that. Yes, he started it in what is present-day Pittsburgh. Okay, so where is this fighting happening? I imagine most of it happens in North America?
You would think so, and that's correct. Most of the conflict did take place in North America, areas of like the Caribbean and also India. We see conflict as well. Some were naval battles, some were land battles, but really this was a conflict fought across the globe.
In the winter, let's flash forward to 1763. We have Great Britain who comes out on top. So how does this affect the British colonists? What's the big deal? So now Britain wins. That's good for the colonists, right?
You would think so, that's right. The colonists were no longer afraid of French domination of the North American colonies, also not as afraid of Native Americans coming into the colonial areas, but As a result, the British government will institute taxes on the American colonists, ultimately telling the colonists, well, we helped to protect you, now it's time that you help us out and start to pay for the war against the French.
So all those taxes and this idea of no taxation without representation really develops as a result of the French and Indian War. So how did it affect the Native Americans? Well, as we saw, they sided with the French. So because they lost, many Native Americans were forced to move out west a little bit, and they also lost a trading partner in France. And what were they trading with France again?
Was it fur?
It was fur, yes. Beaver furs, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about the division of American colonies. There are three different regions we need to know. In New England, which is in the north, many people would go to New England for religious freedom, and the predominant industry was shipbuilding and fishing as well. What about the middle colonies?
All right, well, the middle colonies, we consider the middle colonies to be a little more diverse, at least diverse in regards to the colonial time period we're studying. So we see the middle colonies, areas like Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, again, tend to be more tolerant when it comes to religious freedom. Also, farming and manufacturing tend to be the center of their economic development.
So let's jump on down to the southern colonies. And what we see down there is that their main focus, their main industry is going to be farming, and specifically plantations, which are large-scale farms. Now, you mentioned earlier this idea of cash crops. What is a cash crop again, Mr. Lawrence?
Well, cash crop is a crop that is produced primarily to make money. Most crops we think of, things like wheat, corn, yes, you can sell them to make money, but also you can use them to survive. You can eat them, you can cook with them. But a cash crop, something like cotton, tobacco, the number one purpose is to grow it to make a financial benefit. Now that sounds great, but unfortunately it's not so good to eat cotton, tobacco, and that can cause some problems for your community if that's the only thing that you're deciding to grow.
Have you ever tried to eat cotton before?
I have. I don't recommend it.
It's not very pleasant. No. Okay, let's go to the historical foundations of the American colony. So where did they get their ideas from, specifically when it comes to government? So global superstars will remember from ancient Greece. What did the Americans adopt from ancient Greece?
Well, ancient Greece, this idea of direct democracy, and we talk a lot about the issue of democracy in American history, but we also know as American history students that the United States government is not a direct democracy. Direct democracy is where each individual citizen votes on each individual issue. Now, we do not have a direct democracy, but we do have aspects of direct democracy, which we'll talk about throughout this course.
I do not want to vote on every single law. That would not be very interesting to me. So how do these laws get past that? Don't they get some idea from Rome, ancient Rome?
That's right. Americans, or the British at the time, will start to identify with the Roman Republic, or this idea of a republican form of government, where you elect a representative that will go to government and actually represent you within the system, will vote on these issues for you. If you're unhappy with how they vote, you'll have the opportunity to remove that representative in future elections.
Okay, so let's go back to England and see what were some governmental influences from England prior to this time period. And we have the Magna Carta. That's the new Jay-Z album, right?
Yes, that's right, it is.
So what is the Magna Carta?
Well, isn't the Magna Carta a document from English history that limited the power of the monarch?
Absolutely. And we also have the Petition of Rights and the English Bill of Rights. And all three of these, basically what we will see is that they limit the power of the government while also giving more power to citizens. Now, let's talk about a very big event here, the Enlightenment. What is the Enlightenment? Can you remind us, Mr. Lawrence?
The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement throughout Europe that focused on taking the ideas of the scientific revolution and applying it to government.
So this is where we see people like this guy, John Locke, who believed in life, liberty, and property. And we know those three from Thomas Jefferson. He steals and changes it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Next up we have
a guy by the name of Montesquieu. And Montesquieu believed in some basic ideas when we look at American history, things like separation of power. So I always remember Montesquieu, 3 syllables. Remember those 3 branches of government. So again, stolen from that Enlightenment thinker.
Then we have 2 more people, Rousseau and Voltaire. And Voltaire was very famous for believing in freedom of
Speech.
Speech. Yes, he even said, I may not agree with the word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. Where do we see the freedom of speech today?
The First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, which we'll talk about more in the future. And a guy like Rousseau doesn't get a lot of attention, but the idea of something called the social contract, where we follow laws, the government then is responsible for certain things like providing us with roads, protection. So it's a contract between the government and the governed.
All right, let's talk about colonial experiment in government. Three big ideas here that we need to go over. One, we have the Mayflower Compact. This is what that famous ship, the Mayflower, when it was coming over to America, they agreed on a document on how to govern themselves. That is the Mayflower Compact.
We also have the Albany Plan of the Union, a great idea thought up by a guy by the name of Ben Franklin. You've ever heard of him before?
I think so. He got electrocuted, right?
That's right, yeah. He's an early founder who, before the American Revolution, thinks of an idea of starting to unite the American colonies into one group. This was pushed prior or during the French and Indian War.
And how did he help spread the message of this Albany Plan of Union?
Well, he created one of America's first political cartoons. You can see here in the picture, our join, our die, of our snake segmented into different parts, ultimately trying to promote union between the American colonies.
Very good. And also, one of the oldest forms of government in American history is the Virginia House of Burgesses, which is located in Virginia, and it's an early form of representative government. All right, that is it. Thank you very much for watching. We appreciate it. Take a moment and please subscribe to our channel if you have not already. Help spread the word. If you want to throw us on Facebook, Twitter, you want to pin it, go ahead. Throw it on Pinterest. We have no problems with that. And in the words of Benjamin Franklin, just remember, subscribe and succeed.